Good morning. I'm Pastor Danny Veenstra, and I currently serve St. Paul's United Church of Christ in Watervliet, Michigan. This morning, our sermon and scripture is really more in story form, and there will be some scripture interspersed throughout the story. But I'm going to be telling you the story of Esther, one of the heroes of the Jewish faith. And this is a story, not a historical event, but Jews all over the world celebrate a holiday or a festival called Purim, Purim, every year in March, and they read Esther's entire story. Today, I'm going to be condensing it and reading just parts of it. But when the story is read and the bad guy's name is mentioned, the people stomp their feet and they use noisemakers and they hiss and they boo when the name of Haman is read. So I invite you at home when Haman is mentioned because they want to blot out his name for all time. Once upon a time, beginning as all good stories do, there was a king, Akashverosh was his name. Now, because that's such a long name from now on, I'm going to just simply call him the king. The king held a party, huge, elaborate, fancy party that went on for 6 months for all the noblemen and the officials of his 127 provinces. The king wanted to show off his wealth and his power. Now, it isn't clear how drunk they were at this event, even though it went on for 6 months, because there was a rule in place that you could only drink when the king took a drink. We don't know if he was quite a drinker or not so much. We do know, though, that at the end of the 6 months, the king had a smaller party for the people just within the city limits. And for this party, he lifted the drinking rule. So imagine all the food and the booze that you could want there for the taking for 7 days. I would gather that they were pretty tipsy by the end of the 7 days. Now, at the same time, his queen, Queen Vashti, the most favored of all the women in his harem, had a more modest gathering for the ladies. At the end of the 7 days, when everybody was rip-roaring drunk, the king requested that Queen Vashti appear before him in her crown. The way it's written, it implies that that was all she was supposed to wear when she appeared before the king, just her crown. Queen Vashti refused. Well, the king was furious and probably embarrassed in front of his nobles. He wasn't used to having his wishes denied. So he asked his advisors, "What should I do with this woman?" Well, his advisors cleverly told the king from Esther chapter 1. Then Memucan spoke up in front of the king and the officials. "Queen Vashti has done something wrong, not just to the king himself. She's done wrong to all the officials and the peoples in all the provinces of the king. News of what the queen did will reach all women, making them look down on their husbands. They will say the king ordered servants to bring Queen Vashti before him, but she refused to come. This very day, the important women of Persia and Media who hear about the queen will tell the royal officials the same thing. Not doing it. There will be no end to the put-downs and the arguments. Now, if the king wishes, send out a royal order. Have it written into the law that can never be changed. It should say that Vashti will never come again before the king. It should also say the king will give her royal place to someone better than she is. When the order becomes public through the whole empire, vast as it is, the women will fall in line and treat their husbands properly. This rule should touch everyone, from the important families to the knot. Well, the king liked this plan, as did all the other men sitting there. So he did just what Memucan had suggested. Oh, how hard those powerful men worked to keep women in their place. The king banished Vashti forever from appearing in court again, took away her crown. But soon the king began to miss his lovely queen, and the king was sad. So his advisors came up with a plan. Let's hold a contest, a beauty contest, to find a new queen. We will abduct, young girls from all over the 127 provinces and bring them to the palace compound where we will place them, imprison them in the harem. We'll spend 1 year getting them ready to go before the king. Now, this getting ready involved ointments and perfumes and hairdressers and beauty treatments and learning the rules of the court. And the major rule that they needed to remember was you must never go before the king unless he summons you. He could put you to death. From chapter 2, now there was a Jew in the fortified part of Susa whose name was Mordecai. He was a Benjaminite. His people had been taken away from Jerusalem and exiled to Babylon. Mordecai had been a father to Esther, though she was really his cousin because she had neither father nor mother. The girl had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. When her parents died, Mordecai had taken her in to be his daughter. When the king's order and the new law became public, many young women were gathered into the fortified part of Susa under the care of Haggai. Esther was also taken to the palace to be put under the care of Haggai, the one in charge of all the women. Esther pleased him and won his kindness. He quickly began her beauty treatments and gave her carefully chosen foods. He gave her 7 servants and moved her and her servants into the nicest rooms in the women's house, the harem. Now Esther, a Jew, hadn't told anyone her race or her family background because Mordecai had ordered her not to. At the end of the year, Esther's turn came to be called to go in to the king to spend the night with him. She pleased him more than all of the other young girls, and he crowned Esther as his new queen. While Esther spent that first year in captivity being dolled up and primped and prepped, Mordecai hung out at the palace gate, hoping to hear word of his beloved Esther. While he was hanging around, he heard 2 men plotting to kill the king. Well, Mordecai got word into the palace about what was to happen. And Esther passed along this information somehow to the king. And the good deed in Mordecai's name, saving the king's life, was recorded in the king's book of big events. Now, about this same time, the king promoted a man with a black heart to become his prime minister. His name was Haman. Now, the king ordered everyone to bow down as Haman walked by, but Mordecai, as a Jew, refused. From chapter 3. When Haman himself saw that Mordecai didn't kneel or bow down, he became very angry, but he decided not to kill only Mordecai, but also all of Mordecai's people, because he had learned that Mordecai was a Jew. He planned to wipe out all the Jews throughout the kingdom. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of the rule of the king's servants threw pur, or dice, to pick out the date that was going to be the great date to kill all the Jews. They chose the 13th day of the 12th month. Then Haman said to the king, A certain group of people exists in pockets among all the other people in all the provinces. They're different than everyone else, and they refuse to obey the king's laws. There's no good reason for the king to put up with them anymore. If the king wishes, let a letter be written to send out to destroy them all, and I personally will hand over 10,000 pieces of silver into the king's treasury once the deed is done. Well, the king removed his royal ring from his finger, and he handed it to Haman, enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, both the money and the people are under your power. Do as you like with them. When Mordecai heard of this plan, he went into mourning. He tore his clothes, put ashes on his head, and went into the center of the city wailing. As the news spread, a great sadness came over all of the Jewish people. God's people were brokenhearted. Well, now word reached Queen Esther that her uncle was in mourning. She sent a servant out to find out why. Mordecai told the servant of Haman's plan, how he would pay into the king's purses once all the Jews were dead. Mordecai told the servant to order Esther to go before the king and plead for her people's lives. But as Esther had been taught, none of the harem women, not even the queen, could go before the king without being summoned. She sent word back to Mordecai, I can't do this, I may be killed. But Mordecai responded with the famous words, perhaps it was for such a time as this that you were born, that you are where you are, in a position to help. So Esther asked the people to pray for her for 3 days. She herself fasted and prayed so that it would help her to be brave. And she put on her finest garments and stood where the king could see her, just outside the throne room. She must have really been something to see, because when the king saw her, he was pleased, and he held out his royal scepter and beckoned her to come and speak to him. The king said, now what is it you wish? I'll give you anything, up to half my kingdom. Esther wisely that day simply asked the king and Haman to come to dinner the next night. And there at the dinner, she would tell the king what she really wanted. Well, Haman, when he heard about the invitation, was pleased. Me, I got invited to have dinner with the king and queen all by myself. But on his way home, he saw Mordecai just sitting. Mordecai didn't get up. Mordecai didn't bow to him, and Haman was furious. He sputtered out his anger to his wife and his friends when he got home. And they helped him plot to kill Mordecai by erecting a 75-foot pole and impaling Mordecai on it. Well, that same night, perhaps in anticipation of having dinner with his beautiful queen and his prime minister, the king had trouble sleeping. To soothe himself, he asked one of his servants to read to him out of his book of great events. When Mordecai's deed of saving the king was read, the king said, what is it we've done for this fine man? Nothing, sire, said the servant. Well, at that moment, Haman showed up to tell the king about the 75-foot pole he'd erected to impale Mordecai on. But the king spoke first. From chapter 6. When Haman entered, the king asked, what should be done for the man whom the king really wants to honor? Well, of course, Haman thought to himself, who would the king want to honor more than me? So he said to the king, here's what should be done for a man the king really wants to honor. Have servants bring out a royal robe that the king himself has worn. Have them bring out a horse that the king himself has ridden. Then hand the robe and the horse to another man and have him place the robe on the honored man's shoulders. Put him on the horse and have that man lead this honored person through town shouting, 'This is what the king does for someone that he honors.' Well, the king said to Haman, 'Hurry, take the robe, take the horse, just as you've said, and do that for Mordecai the Jew who works outside at the king's gate. Don't leave out a single thing you've said.' So Haman took the robe and the horse, and he put the robe on Mordecai. He led him on horseback through the city square, shouting, 'This is what the king does for the man he really wants to honor.' Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, while Haman hurried home feeling great shame. That night was the banquet where the prime minister Haman had to go because Esther had prepared it and invited him and the king. He was still filled with shame. When the king asked Esther what she wanted, Queen Esther answered, 'If it please the king, and if the king wishes, give me my life. That's my wish, and the lives of my people too. That's my desire.' If we had been sold just into slavery, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But we've been sold to be wiped out, killed, destroyed." The king said to the queen, "Who is this person who has planned this? And where is he? Who would dare to do such a thing?" Esther replied, and I bet she pointed, "Him, a man who hates, this wicked Haman." Well, Haman was overcome with terror in the presence of the king and the queen. Furious, the king got up and stomped out into the garden. But Haman stood up to beg Queen Esther for his life. He saw clearly that things were not going to go his way. The king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room just as Haman was kneeling down on the couch where Esther was reclining. "Will you even molest the queen while I'm in the house?" the king said. The words had barely left the king's mouth before covering Haman's face with dread. Harbona, one of the eunuchs serving the king, said, "Look, sir, there's the stake that Haman put up in his yard to impale Mordecai. It's standing at Haman's house." "Impale him on it," the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the very pole that he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger went away. The plans that Haman had made, the letter that he had written, sent out to all the provinces ordering the Jews to be killed, were nullified when Queen Esther wrote in the king's name, the Jews were not to be killed. Mordecai was given Haman's power and property for all time, and the festival of Purim, named for the dice, the pur that they threw to decide the day, is observed every year in March. 4 mitzvahs or good deeds are called for. 1, the reading of the story. 2, giving to charity. 3, sending food or bringing food to friends, usually sweet treats. And 4, to sit down and feast with family and friends. In this story, good triumphs, evil is destroyed, and all ends happily. It's no surprise that the book of Esther remains so popular in Jewish worship, despite its failure to mention God even once. The story hints at God's involvement, but they're hidden, as God's involvement in our daily lives is often invisible. But this story reminds us God is always, always on the side of the oppressed. But God works through willing human instruments to achieve the kingdom God dreams of, justice for all. Might you be placed here for such a time as this? A question to ponder. The end.